welcome to I-24 News Defense, your weekly review of strategic affairs, security, intelligence, and more, brought to you in cooperation with Israel Defense Magazine. Tonight, we have a special edition focusing on the IDF's Operation Protective Edge, launched in response to the growing escalation of rocket attacks on Israel by Hamas. Before that, let's take a look at what else is happening in the world.
We begin in Uganda, where rebels armed with machetes, spears and guns carried out a series of attacks on police stations, military barracks, banks and neighboring rival gangs. At least 96 people have been killed in the week of clashes in the mountainous region that borders the Democratic Republic of Congo. This figure includes 10 soldiers and policemen and 11 civilians. Officials blame a new fundamentalist group, and the army sent in extra troops to hunt them down. Moving on to Kenya, where at least 21 people were killed in new attacks in the same area, where some 60 people were massacred last month. Somalia's Shabab rebels claimed that the al-Qaeda-linked group's fighters had struck again in Kenya, but the police accused the Mombasa Republican Council, a group that campaigns for independence for the coastal region. We end in Pearl Harbor, where the U.S. and China are among 22 nations taking part in the 2014 Rim of the Pacific naval exercise, involving around 50 ships, 6 submarines, more than 200 aircraft, and 25,000 personnel. Chinese forces at RIMPAC include a missile destroyer, a missile frigate, a supply ship, a hospital ship, 2 helicopters, a commando unit, and a diving unit, a total of 1,100 personnel. Washington hopes China's participation in the 5-week exercise will build trust and help avert misunderstandings on the high seas that could escalate into a crisis.
Israel said enough to the growing escalation of rocket attacks from the Gaza Strip and launched Operation Protective Edge, with air raids around the clock and ground forces being deployed in the south. More in this next report.
With non-stop rocket fire from Gaza in almost every direction, including the Tel Aviv and Jerusalem metropolitan areas, the Israeli government is under intense pressure to act with even greater force. And this means a ground incursion into the Gaza Strip is looking increasingly more likely. The Nachal Infantry Brigade is expected to reach the Gaza border. In the meantime, paratrooper and Givati brigades are already here. On Tuesday night, ground forces were in action around the southern Gaza Strip. The Kerem Shalom border crossing was the focus of initial fears of a militant infiltration into Israel. Although those fears proved unfounded, Israeli artillery fire could be heard pounding targets within Gaza. But despite the ground buildup, most of Israel's military activity here remains aerial, with 160 targets hit on Tuesday night alone and a number of prominent Palestinian militants killed.
The goal is clear: create panic in Israel. The method: long-range M302 Syrian missiles. The rocket attack spread through Israel Wednesday, breaking a previous unwanted record, reaching the northern city of Zichron Yaakov, 126 kilometers from the Gaza Strip. The Hamas military wing took responsibility for this attack, claiming they used the R-160 rocket and were targeting Haifa, which lays 150 kilometers from Gaza, as the missile flies. But the key weapon in both Hamas' arsenal and its strategy are the M302 projectiles. Shrapnel from one was found Tuesday after slamming into Hadera, 110.6 kilometers north of the Strip. These missiles are launched from a mobile missile launcher and can reach 200 kilometers. The IDF's problem is that most of these rockets are stored near residential areas, schools, hospitals, and mosques. Hence, it's impossible to destroy the rocket stockpiles. Regardless of the technicalities, the effect on Israelis of these long-range missiles is mainly psychological, with all the symbolical targets previously thought safe, such as Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, now in range.
Joining me now is Reserve Major General Israel Ziv, the former head of the IDF Operations Branch and the former commander of the Gaza Division. Good evening, General.
Good evening, Adas.
The Israeli Air Force is conducting air raids around the clock, but Hamas and the other terror groups in the Gaza Strip are expanding the range of the rocket attacks. How long can this cycle continue?
Actually, I would say, although it's a fight between two, the ball is in the Hamas hand. The Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli government does not have any intention to escalate the situation, and actually we do what we have to do just in order for the Hamas to wake up and to bring to this shooting to a stop. But definitely, if it's needed, we can hold and keep on those airstrikes as long as it's needed, and even be ready to any land invasion if it's needed.
Yeah. For the first time in recent conflicts between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, we saw an attempt to carry out a terror attack from the sea near Zikim. What other capabilities do Hamas militants have?
Well, it's kind of the same old story. The Hamas is kind of trying to learn from the last experiences and trying to create new surprises to Israel. Unfortunately, as we see, and fortunately as we see, unfortunately for them, is that Israel is ready for that due to a very good intelligence, due to a very good analysis of what they are capable of, and due to be very much prepared to most of their kind of new surprises, which are not a surprise. And somehow the Hamas doesn't learn. I mean, he's not equal. He will never be equal to Israel. He cannot beat Israel militarily, and definitely not by this method of terror. The question if they are learning, I'm afraid that not. I mean, they are what they are. It's a terror organization. Their way is resistance. They rather that every time that they get to the point, instead of being responsible for their population. I mean, they are government. They need to take care of their people. But any time that the chance is there, they are running into the model, the DNA that they know to do, which is terror, unfortunately.
Yes. You mentioned the preparation, and currently the IDF is calling up thousands of reserve soldiers. Are we on the verge of a ground offensive?
Yes, but I don't think that anyone is going to take the decision very, very fast, and definitely not on a base of a responsive to responding the escalation. But do we preparing? Yes. Why? From two reasons. One, as a threat, because in the end of the day, the Hamas base is Gaza, and as long as it's holding Gaza, he has the ground to operate, and Israel has to prepare itself for that. And the second issue, if we have to, we have to. In certain point, we might do this land operation in order to shut down completely the Hamas capabilities.
General, you commanded the Gaza division. What can a ground operation achieve that air raids cannot?
The ground maneuver is totally different story. I mean, now we maximize the Israeli capability because we have this intelligence dominance, we have absolute control on the air, and I think that the situation or the balance of the situation is absolutely for the Israeli Defense Forces. Once we move into ground maneuvering, it's a different story. Still, Israel has, of course, its advantage, but there are other elements that are there. There is friction, there is civilian population, there is collateral damage, there is all those things. Gaza, we have to remember, is one of the most dense populated region in the world, in the whole world. So it's going to be tough, and this is why the Israelis are not so hurrying in getting in. But we can still keep excellent dominancy, and it's not a big issue to take over Gaza. I mean, I hope the Hamas does not think that it's for Israel militarily, it's a very big issue to take over Gaza. It's not the case.
General, thank you very much. Have a good evening. Hundreds of rockets were fired at Israel in the last week, but there were no fatalities. This can be attributed to the Iron Dome, which intercepts rockets in mid-air, and to citizens taking the necessary precautions. More in this next report.
With the ground operation not yet underway, the hero of Operation Protective Edge is the Iron Dome anti-rocket system, which intercepts missiles headed to inhabited areas. In the past, many critics doubted the system's necessity and economic cost, but today, after 2012's Operation Pillar of Defense, and a week into Protective Edge, there was a wide consensus regarding its efficiency, especially because a scenario of mass casualties would make it difficult for the government to make vital defense decisions. Israel has 7 Iron Dome batteries produced by Rafael. According to experts, in the past the ratio was 1 Israeli fatality per 100 rockets, but in Operation Pillar of Defense, the ratio rose to 1 kill per 250 rockets. Performance analysis of previous rounds of fighting showed that the system achieved a nearly 90% success rate. The Iron Dome's performance is improving thanks to software and hardware updates led by Rafael engineers and Israeli Air Force Base analysis of past events. Iron Dome has a very high success rate in intercepting rockets that threaten cities in Israel's center and thus prevent a strategic shift in the situation. The cost of each interception remains high, though, and stands at about $50,000. The Israeli Home Front Command doesn't just rely only on the system. Public instructions are to enter protected rooms immediately upon hearing an alarm, with the efficient time frame calculated according to the distance from Gaza. Protected spaces almost completely prevent the risk of injury, and Homefront Command officials recommend citizens behave responsibly. Even with hundreds of rockets descending on Israeli cities, not even 1 fatality was suffered.
Joining me now on set is Reserve Brigadier General Uzi Rubin, the former head of Israel's Missile Defense Command. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, what is the secret of the Iron Dome, the success of the Iron Dome?
Hard work and much brains.
But how does it work?
Well, it works like any interception missile, like Arrow, like the American THAAD, like the French SAMT. Basically, you detect the threat, you calculate its trajectory, you calculate where to hit it, and then you send out an interceptor, and hopefully you hit it.
Mm-hmm. Most of the rockets being launched from Gaza are homemade, so how much damage can they cause?
Quite considerable.
Elaborate on that.
The Grad is not homemade. It's factory made in Iran. It has a weight of about 20 kilograms and can demolish half a house. The bigger one, what they call M75, the one that they fire at Tel Aviv, has a weight of about 90 kilograms. This can demolish a house. And the bigger one, what they call R160, the one that fired at Haifa, may have a warhead, I don't know, but may have a warhead 150 kilograms, which can really, I'd say, this is really a blockbuster.
Yes, but as far as I understand, the ones that were launched to Haifa were not carrying a warhead.
Well, it's not, I'm not in the picture of what exactly fell there. Obviously, they didn't reach Haifa. I don't know why. Theoretically, they have the range. And I suspect they'll try again. Perhaps something went wrong.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Iron Dome has a strategic meaning by saving lives, and by the pressure is not on the government to do something. No pressure here, right?
Yes, it reduces the pressure. There is a pressure, and I suspect that the other factions are firing the missiles, knowing full well that most of them, if not all, will be intercepted. This is the harassment. They harass the psyche of the Israeli people, trying to erode their fortitude and bring about a demand to bring this thing to conclusion in their favor.
In one of your recent interviews, you were quoted saying there is no safe place in Israel, rather pessimistic.
Well, it's realistic. I wouldn't say pessimistic. I was born before the War of Independence, when the slogan was, at that time, the word was, the whole country is a front line. And that was the time, this was 1948. There's nothing new here.
So we are in the same reality.
The same reality was there anywhere, and then it doesn't make much difference if the threat comes from a rocket or comes from a suicide bomber in a bus in the middle of Tel Aviv.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to the rocket threats from the south, Israel is also targeted by missiles from basically the whole Middle East.
Well, I wouldn't say the whole Middle East. This is the axis of the Iranian axis, is Iran, its Syrian allies and Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is a part of the Syrian establishment, and to some extent Hamas too, which is kind of a follower. It's not part exactly of the axis, but it's a follower. So these are the directions. From Jordan, right now, we have reasonable relations, same thing with Egypt. Saudi Arabia have missiles. They have missiles, but they are not aimed at us. They have their own worries with Iran. So I'd say we are threatened, but not from everywhere.
So we're threatened. How well are we protected?
Well, I hope we are protected well, and I was working on it, and I hope that my successors are working even harder.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
You're most welcome.
That is all we had time for tonight. Be sure to catch us next week for another edition of I-24 News Defense. And for all the latest headlines, log on to www.i24news.tv. Have a safe night here from Jaffa Port.